our final speaker is Dr. Mark VanGessel. Dr. VanGessel is the weed science professor and extension specialist at the University of Delaware. And he is here today to talk to us about weed management for pastures and hayfields.
All right, thanks, Amanda. I was asked to talk a little bit about weed management in pastures and hayfields, and kind of starting off with the kind of question is that, is there anything new? And kind of taking that slant, if you will, and putting this talk together. I do need to acknowledge companies that I work with very closely. Quentin Johnson, who's been my assistant here for as long as I've been here, and want to thank him for a lot of his work, particularly as it relates to the pastures and forages. Quentin did retire just this past month, and so I wish him the best in his retirement. And then also Dwight Lingenfelter up at Penn State. Dwight put together a lot of projects with pastures as well. So this is definitely a team effort, not only in pastures, but in most of our research. So if I was just going to talk about what's new for pastures, I think it would be a pretty quiet presentation, very short. Unfortunately, as far as new, there's really very few new products available, and I want to kind of go through that and explain that, because I get questions about why there aren't more products for hay and for pastures, and what might be coming down the pipe as far as new products. I want to talk about that, and then review some of the chemical options that we do currently have available for hay and pastures, and maybe make some comments about making them work better for us. All right. So let me just kind of start off as kind of some really basic information on herbicides, and kind of explain when we talk about it, it's often quite confusing in terms of what products we're talking about, and I want to kind of explain why that might be. This is just a generic, it's New Farms Weedar, but it's just used as a representative label for a product that we often use in pasture. It's 2,4-D. A lot of times I get asked, what's the best thing to use? I often go with the generic name of just 2,4-D, and then they'll come back, well, what about this product, and what about that product? And they really are many of the same active ingredients, just formulated as different products. Oops. So hang on, backwards here. So the trade name here is Weedar. I looked last night at the Delaware Department of Ag Pesticide Database, and there were over 50 different 2,4-D formulations labeled for the use in Delaware. So there's a lot of trade names out there, but it's really the active ingredient that we refer to, or the common name. And so in this case with Weedar, the common name is 2,4-D, and in even more specifically, this is the dimethylamine salt. 2,4-D is an acid. A lot of the products that we use in forages, in grass seeds, are acids, and in order to improve handability, formulations in use, they're formulated as a salt, and there's different salts out there. Some of the salts have slightly different characteristics, but in this case, this is a 2,4-D amine salt. And another piece of information that's really important as we start to look at products is understanding what is the group number or herbicide number. And this is something that's been fairly recent addition to the labels. The group number just tells which herbicide family it's in, and a given herbicide family may have multiple products And so the idea is if you're using products with the same number repeatedly, you need to start asking yourself, is this a product that's of high risk for developing resistance? And if so, what should I be shifting to, or what should I be tank mixing with to avoid resistance? And within that, as well, there's a number of products that are multiple active ingredients within the same container. An example of that is Crossbow. Again, you have the trade name there. The active ingredients, there's 2 active ingredients in Crossbow. One of them is 2,4-D, and the other one is triclopyr. One of the things to notice with this 2,4-D that's in Crossbow, it's an ester instead of an amine. The difference between the amine and the ester salts is that esters tend to be more volatile. They have more post-emergence activity, but the amines tend to have a little bit more soil activity. And again, slightly less volatile. We're talking fairly slight differences there. And while there's 2 active ingredients in this container, they're both group 4 herbicides. So again, even if there's premixes, we see the same information on the labels. So just, particularly as we talk about herbicide and herbicide chemistry, we tend to kind of group them in categories, and one of them is we group them by mode of action. This is the processes that the plant undergoes or that's affected by the herbicide. It's the entire sequence of events that causes death within the plant. So how is it that herbicide is killing that weed? What is that mode of action? It's a term we often hear related to herbicides. The other term that we often hear is the mechanism of action. And a lot of times people might use those terms interchangeably, but the mechanism of action is the actual site within the plant where the herbicide interacts. It's often at an enzyme or cell structure that occurs, but it's it's within the site that act occurs. And that's the number that we see on the herbicide label. It's that herbicide mechanism of action number. And many active ingredients can have that same mechanism of action. Oftentimes, if a weed is resistant to one herbicide within that mechanism of action, they often are resistant to others herbicides as well. So an example of that is our cases in field crops where we have ALS resistance in a lot of our weed species. ALS is a large class of chemistry, and it includes things like Sandia and Raptor and Pursuit and Scepter and First Rate, Accent. I can go on now with a number of products, but we've often seen if it's resistant to one of those herbicides, it's often resistant to many others within that mechanism of action. So understanding mechanisms of action, understanding that those herbicide numbers, really important to avoid resistance. And sometimes we use the names interchangeably between sites of action and mechanism of action. So just a little bit of background, and I think it'd be helpful as we kind of go forward and I use those terms. So, why are there no new herbicides for pastures and for hay crops? Well, if we look at a lot of the products we're using and looking at the years in which they were discovered, they were using a lot of old chemistry. One of the standards that we've got, within our grass crops, 2,4-D, it was discovered in 1950. So it's over 80 years old. Atrazine, kind of still the base herbicide for a lot of our corn crops, discovered in the 50s. And the first of the lasso duals was discovered in the 50s or 60s. So you can see we're dealing with a lot of chemistry that's been around for a long time. And one of the more recent products that has come to the market in field crops has been that HPPD inhibiting class of chemistries, things like Impact and Callisto Laudis. And while they've been in the marketplace now for about no more than 20 years, they were actually discovered 40 years ago. They were discovered back in the 1980s. So we just are not seeing a lot of new chemistry being developed. And while we see new active ingredients, new individual products, we're not seeing new mechanisms of actions or new sites of action, new methods by which these herbicides are killing weeds. If we look at some of the more notable herbicides that have been registered just since 2000, you see the list here: Axial and Osprey. They all within existing chemistries. So Axial is a Group 1 herbicide like Post and Fusilade, which has been around for a long time. Sharpen and Tree Fix, sulfonasil, been around. It's a PPO herbicide. Really, the only new active ingredient is the Alliot. The new mechanism of action is Alliot, which is currently registered in tree fruits and perennial fruit crops, tree crops. But that's really of the notable herbicides since 2000. There's been only one new mechanism of action. And as we start looking at developing better resistance strategies, what we really are looking for is some new mechanisms of action out there. If we look at the number of patents for new herbicides that have been registered since 1990, you can see that it has dropped tremendously since 1990. There's just not as many new publications for patents that happened over that time period. And so why is there's been such a reduction in the number of patents for new herbicides? It really goes back to Roundup Ready. In the late 1990s, Monsanto came out with their Roundup Ready technology for corn, cotton, soybeans, and so many farmers just came down to relying on Roundup. And it was the one product that was very effective. It was the only product that was used. The number of other products used just crashed, and it really took the financial incentive out of the marketplace for developing new herbicides, particularly for a while, for probably about a 5 to 7 year period, till we started to see resistance. Some of the other reasons why is just cost. It's estimated now that it's over $250 million to develop a new active ingredient. That's just a new active ingredient. It's not necessarily a new mechanism of action. It's estimated to take about 10 to 15 years for that whole process, from identifying a molecule to refining it and getting it into the marketplace. And that only leaves about 14 years for a company to recoup their cost and investment, given the life of a patent being 25 years. So there's one on the financial side, why there's been so few new products out there. Some of the other reasons why, and some of the reasons why the cost is high, is the understanding the environmental safety of these products, ensuring that they're safe around surface waters and that they don't get to groundwaters, that they're compatible with wildlife and fish and aquatic creatures, that there's no acute or chronic toxicity for humans, and the understanding the persistence of it. There's a fine line with a lot of these products that we like to see some residual control out of them, but we don't want too much residual control. We don't want so much that it interferes with what we plant the following season. So trying to find that line between effective residual control, but not having carryover and rotational issues. So again, and of course, we've got crop safety issues that we want to kill weeds, but we don't want to injure our crop. To be able to come up with a formulation that handles well, stays in solution well, doesn't separate, and it has a shelf life of because a lot of products may sit on the shelf for a year or so, that it has that shelf life and that stability. And it can perform consistently over a range of soil and water situations, things like water pH. Does it change its performance? How does it perform under different characteristics? And what type of conditions can we apply it in? There's been pretty high standards now as far as use around non-ag sites, so ensuring that it's not odoriferous, it doesn't have drift and off-target issues. And the industry is looking for low application standards, so that, or low application rates, so that we're applying things as in the ounces as opposed to pounds and quarts or even gallons like we used to. And then of course that the product is compatible with other herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers. And to be able to do all that and have a product that's not too expensive for folks to use. So the other part of that is the industry has shrunk over the last 20 years. From having 12 to 15 major agronomic manufacturers, we're down to only a handful that are still in the business. And it's only recently that they have started to ramp up their herbicide discovery. People have seen that the Roundup is no longer, or glyphosate is no longer the silver bullet that they feared it was going to be 25 years ago when Roundup Ready first came out, and that it is a component of a weed management program, and there's need for other chemistries. So companies are starting to ramp up their herbicide discovery groups, but it takes a while. Remember, it was about 10, 15 years to go from discovery to having a commercial product. So just kind of in way of just general background as to why we don't have like a laundry list of new products that we can use in pastures and hay crops right now. So yet we still have weeds, and we have weeds that are impacting the quantity and the quality of our hay and forages. And weeds, they compete for light nutrients and end up reducing the yield and the quality of our forages. They lower the feed value, particularly if we have poisonous plants that can injure the animal, or a lot of times our poisonous plants are such that animals realize that they shouldn't be eaten, and so while they're there, the animal just avoids that area, and so that area and adjacent to the weed is not available for grazing. So poisonous plants are really an issue. And with that said, some weeds do have good quality as forages, things like lamb's quarter, pigweed, dandelion, and dock. They can be, they're often grazed in pasture situations. Animals feed on them quite readily, but that's not true for all weeds. Just things to keep in mind as we think about our weed management programs. and some of the other issues that are often associated with weeds. A host for insects and pathogens. Trying to sell or rent land. Nobody wants to take on someone else's problem, so it can degrade the value and just the overall appearance. So most of our biggest weed problems in hay and pastures are winter annuals. These are weeds that generally germinate in the fall, survive the winter, resume growth in early spring, and then produce flowers in the late spring, early summer, and set seeds. Biennials are another issue. These are the species that take 2 years to complete their life cycles. Things like a lot of our thistles fall in that category, musk thistle and so on. And then perennials, because the land is pretty much undisturbed for a period of time, over years, it gives an opportunity for some of these perennials to invade. Things like horse nettle and dogbane, henbit, all perennial weeds that can be problematic in pastures. But and there are summer annuals. They are their biggest problem in many cases is with at establishment time. But I think in many cases our problem weeds are this first list: winter annuals, biennials, and perennials, which are needed to be oftentimes controlled at a different time than our summer annuals. Yet a lot of the questions I get about weed control are focused on summer annuals. So I think we need to think about what is it that is a problem species, and that they aren't our typical application timings that we use for other crops, that they are specifically, we need to maybe shift our timing so we're specifically going at the problem life cycle weeds. So effective weed control starts with establishment and maintaining healthy pastures and hayfields. We just don't have a lot of good options for pre-emergence herbicides. In fact, we have none really labeled for pre-emergence herbicides. And so we're going and we're planting in, and we're just hoping that the crop gets established before the weeds have a chance to overgrow them. And in many cases, particularly when we're going back into pasture fields year after year, we've built up seed bank for those weeds that are adapted to that situation, that we're really kind of fighting an uphill battle. So challenge is getting that early establishment and maintaining that pasture or hayfield until the crop gets well established. Once it gets established, following the good production practices, maintaining good soil pH, fertility, cutting at the right height, all those sort of things that help to develop a vigorous root system and a vigorously growing crop. And in addition to some of these cultural practices, also things that we can look at are mechanical as well as chemical. Mowing the pastures routinely and at the proper time and the proper height to keep weeds from producing seeds and keeping weeds in check. Also to help maintain the vigorous growth of that forage crop. Seems like a small thing, but it really pays off with repeated and consistent use. Removing weeds by hand if necessary. Again, we don't always have a chemical tool for some of these species. And I think oftentimes folks just throw up their hands and say, well, if I can't spray it, there's nothing I can do about it. And, as time consuming and as something that none of us want to do, removing weeds by hand may be an option that's going to help save headaches down the road. And we're talking, in this case, relatively small infestations, but preventing those weeds from maturing and putting seeds back into the seed bank where they can be for the next couple of seasons can really help us out. And then of course, chemical options where appropriate, and using the appropriate herbicide for the weed problems that we have, and using it at the appropriate time. So this, I'm going to talk a little bit now more specific about chemical control and thoughts and options that we have available for chemical control in our pastures. You know, a lot of times our options are limited because with the mixed stand, we have grasses and legumes, and we want to maintain one or the other, and that really makes it difficult. A lot of our herbicides that are safe on grasses will damage or kill clovers or legumes, and then vice versa. So mixed stands can be challenging and add another level of management complexity to it. Trying to control weeds that are too large. You know, you think about our herbicide options that we have, and you know, none of them are, I'll say this, none of them are outstanding products. We don't have a product there that will control all weeds at all sizes. So we're dealing with products that have been developed for targeting small seedlings or perennial weeds at the proper time. And so we can't necessarily fit when to spray in what our schedule is. More important, that we need to focus on what are the weeds that we have, focusing on the timing that's going to be most successful for control. We've got to be careful on what we can use because of sensitive crops growing nearby, whether that's vegetables or grapes or things like ornamentals in neighborhoods. We want to be good citizens, we want to be good neighbors, and so sometimes there's just things that we can't use in our arsenal because of close proximity to sensitive vegetation. Controlling grasses within a grass crop is extremely challenging, and we just don't have a tool for controlling established grasses in our grass crops for the most part. There's a product called Facet that's labeled for use in grass pastures, but it's only effective on it's only effective on small annual grass species, things that are 1 to 2 inches at the most. We're also limited because of what grazing restrictions there might be, particularly if we're putting animals back on. What animals do we have? How soon are we going to put them on after application? Do we have an area where we can isolate them for that period of time after application before they can be grazed? If not, we can limit what we can use. Cost of treatment. Some of the forage herbicides are relatively inexpensive compared to other crops, yet they still, given the amount of land that needs to be applied, it can add up. So cost of treatment and justifying whether to spray or not. And then, where are you at with the life of your stand? Are you thinking about reseeding? Are you thinking about overseeding? That can limit what you be able to spray. Again, when that early discussion about rotational restrictions with herbicides, if we spray certain products, we may have anywhere from a couple months to maybe over a year before we can successfully reseed that field. So things to think about, and making sure that we're aware of when we spray some of these fields. So for our grass, hay, and pastures, and this is strictly grass species, grass crop, we have a lot of herbicides within that group 4 class. This is that herbicide group 4. The site of action or mechanism of action is plant growth regulators. They cause a uneven growth within the cell of the plant that causes twisting that then interferes with transport of water and nutrients throughout the plant. There's a number of products that fall within this group that are labeled for pastures: 2,4-D and dicamba, clopyralid, triclopyr, which is often used in combination with 2,4-D, and then some other combinations that we have. So these are, while there's a number of products on this list here, they all are the same mechanism or site of action, the plant growth regulators. None of these are effective on grasses, strictly on broadleaf weeds, and none of these, I would say, are often considered standalone. They're often used in combination with one another to broaden that spectrum of control. So a lot of times we'll see in one of our standard recommendations for a lot of grass pastures in the appropriate setting is a 2,4-D dicamba combination. It's one of the lower cost options, and those products together generally all form one, either one of them used by themselves. And you can see, a lot of the industry has gone to prepackaging these products so that there's more than one active ingredient in a container, like the curtail and the crossbow. Many of them control annuals as well as broadleaf or perennial broadleaf weeds. Some other herbicides that are labeled for grass and fields: metsulfuron or Cimarron. It is an ALS inhibiting herbicide, a group 2 herbicide for annual and broadleaf weeds. Again, none of these, or very few of these, have much grass activity. AIM, which is post-emergence herbicide, has a very narrow range of species that it will control. For most of our summer annual weeds or winter annual weeds, they have to be very small, within 1 to 2 inches of height. The one thing where AIM shines is for folks who have Star of Bethlehem. AIM is a very good herbicide on Star of Bethlehem, and not only for controlling it that year, but also for knocking back those nutlets and bulbs and providing control into the next year. Prowl is labeled as a recent label for grass and hay pastures. This is one product that will provide grass control, one of the products for grass control. Next one as well. Anyways, Prowl H2O, it is labeled as a pre-emergence herbicide. It has no control of emerged weeds, so it's got to be applied before the grasses have emerged, the grass weeds. So depending on the species of grass that you're going after, it may need to be an early spring application before it starts to emerge. Think about crabgrass, something that often get asked about controlling in pastures. Well, it's got to be applied early spring. You think about the kind of the rule of thumb for a lot of landscape and in the landscape industry is to get your pre-emergence crabgrass herbicide out before the forsythias start to bloom. So that's an early spring application. And as such, it often, Prowl will give us a fairly lengthy control of 6, maybe 8 weeks under ideal conditions. But if we're spraying it that early, and crabgrass is a species that has a very long germination period, we may need to apply a second application later in the summer for those later germinating plants. But Pro-H2O is labeled as a pre-application for grass species. It will also control some of our small seed broadleaves like pigweeds and lamb's quarter. Facet is one that does have some grass, post-emergence grass control, but my experience with Facet on grasses is that they need to be very small, 1 to 2 inches. It's not a highly effective herbicide on grasses, so we need to go out if we're targeting specifically grass control with Facet. It needs to be applied very timely while those seedlings are small. Sharpen has a label. It's a PPO herbicide for some annual broadleaf weeds, but a fairly narrow spectrum of weeds it will control. And glyphosate, particularly as a spot treatment for problem weeds that we need to go in and maybe kill a small patch. Used mostly with perennials, small patches of perennials, and going in and spraying them at the best time. And for most perennials, the best time for spraying them while they just before they start to bloom, while the plant is in that bud stage. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is that's when the roots are at the lowest in terms of carbohydrate storage, and so the root systems are weakened. There's not as much there, and that's also about the time that the plant is starting to recharge those root systems. So it's taking that glyphosate and bringing it down to the remaining roots and killing the nodes. So it's that pre-bud stage for glyphosate that really seems to work, have the most effectiveness. Just a couple other comments. We don't have any that we can use at planting as a true pre-emergence herbicide. So we really need to kind of set ourselves up for helping get that crop established. One of the things that some folks have tried is a stale seedbed approach. And that is the strategy of going in, working up the field, getting it all prepared for planting, and then waiting 2 to 3 weeks for that first flush of weeds to come up. After they're up, going in using a product like glyphosate to kill those emerged weeds, and then planting with as little soil disturbance as possible, so you're not stimulating additional germination. That strategy works well on annual species that are only coming from seed, and those that have a fairly narrow germination window. Problem with that is now you've left that soil unprotected for a 2 to 3 week period where it's subjected to pounding rains and movement and so on. But that is something that folks have used and has been, like I said, pretty successful. Some of the, we need to be spraying these at seedling stage while they're small, particularly these are the products that we have that we can spray when the grass is at that seedling stage. AIM, as I mentioned, has a fairly narrow window that it'll control, but dicamba or MCPA, Yukon, which has an ALS herbicide plus dicamba in it, and often at lower rates than we would be using after the pasture or the hay has been established. Metsulfuron, I mentioned that as a product that is labeled for mostly for annual and some perennial broadleaf weeds. Where there are restrictions on its use for fescue and timothy, it can injure these crops. So there's special restrictions on how to use it on the label. So to be sure to check that out. And this is also one of those products that has a very long residual. So if you're thinking of needing to reseed or replant, Metsulfuron may not be the option for you. And again, just emphasizing that Prowl H2O only has pre-activity, won't control post-emergence weeds once they're out, and because of the prolonged germination of some of our grasses, we may need sequential or 2 applications throughout this. Some of the other things to be aware of, particularly in this mid-Atlantic region where a lot of manure might be used in the mushroom industry or might be sold as compost, that some of these products remain biologically active in the manure. And things like clopyrrolate or stinger or curtail is one of these products. And so if you're in the area where you might be selling or donating, either way, your manure, be aware that these products cannot be used on the hay, because as the part of the manure, they still have small trace levels in it that can injure sensitive plants like tomatoes and beans in the gardens and on the fields. 2,4-D and dicamba, these are products that are kind of the standard for a lot of our grass fields. We do have concerns about their use in the heat of the summer because of off-target movement. Trying to spray these when temperatures are above 85 degrees, that they are prone to move with the. When we get those higher temperatures, what happens is as that droplet leaves the nozzle, it starts evaporating immediately. And even before it goes over that course of 3 to 5 feet to hit the target plant, if it starts evaporating, that droplet becomes smaller. And the smaller the droplet, the more prone it is to off-target movement. So we really caution folks about spraying this when our temperatures are above 85 degrees. Another issue with these products is that they do, once they hit the plant, they can change into a gas state, and that gas can volatilize and move off and injure sensitive plants. So another reason why we don't recommend using 2,4-D or dicamba in the summer, because of risk for off-target movement. And yes, there are some new formulations out there, particularly within the dicamba, things like the Extend and so on. They have less chance for off-target movement, but they haven't eliminated it. And another issue is making sure that we're not spraying these products during temperature inversion. That's that really still part of the day when there's no wind. And temperature inversions occur where in normal situations, the air is warmer at the ground and it gets cooler as we move up. But a temperature inversion is that the air temperature is actually cooler at ground level, and then we have a layer of warm air above it. And so we have this sort of stratification of the air. And what that does is that it traps that cool air. There's no mixing that's going on. It's very, very still, very calm. While that often might be a great time for us to be out enjoying it, it's not a good time to be spraying these herbicides like these plant growth regulators. So what happens is that those very fine droplets stay, they don't mix, they don't drop and land on the ground, and they stay in this temperature zone, or this inversion zone, and can stay aloft for an extended period of time and move. And now we have no control over what direction they go, and they can go in almost any direction. And then once the air starts to change and do mixing, they'll settle out. And if they happen to settle out over a grape arbor or a tomato field or ornamental plants, can cause some very dramatic injury. So avoid applying during this temperature inversion. And this happens quite frequently. Probably happens more than we recognize. And so a lot of these products now say you have to wait till you have at least a 1 to 3 mile per hour wind. That's a very light wind, but at least if the wind is moving, we're not in that temperature inversion. And we know which way that wind is moving. We know which way, if there is any drift, we know where it's going to go. And we can make sure that it's not going to go towards sensitive plants. As I mentioned, some of these newer salts of dicamba have come out to reduce volatility. If you think about the old product of VanGessel, it was the most, if that is kind of our baseline in terms of volatility of dicamba, it is the most volatile. It's at the 100% volatility level. A number of years ago, BASF or Sandoz came out with a new formulation of dicamba called Clarity, and it reduced its volatility by about 70%. So a lot less volatile, however, and then with these dicamba-resistant soybeans, they've come out with an even a newer formulation that's reduced even more. It's reduced its volatility by an additional 70%. So much less volatile than the VanGessel or even the Clarity. However, it hasn't eliminated volatility. And so there still is that chance for volatility. And dicamba is a product where there are some plants that are extremely sensitive to it. Soybeans are one. And so even this really limited amount of potential for volatility to happen with these new formulations like Ingenia, there still is that chance that it moves off and that there would be enough product to cause injury to susceptible plants. So, all as a precaution about when you're applying these plant growth regulators and doing it in a responsible way that we don't see off-target movement and injury to sensitive plants. Similarly, there are differences within the 2,4-D. I mentioned early on that 2,4-D is available in different salts that affects their volatility. The 2,4-D esters are the most volatile, and you can see here the amount of injury that we're getting on sensitive plants in distance away from where it's treated. So ester, in this case, we were out to about 150 feet, and we're still picking up injury 150 feet away with the ester formulation. Whereas with the amine, the off-target movement, the volatility was much less, but again, we did not eliminate it. And then a step down, even less volatile, was the choline. Overall, a lot less volatility with the choline or with the 2,4-Ds than we see with dicamba. And again, this is the volatility. This is the movement of once the herbicide has reached the target, the leaf surface, and then it changes into a gas form and moves off. This isn't drift of the physical movement of that droplet from the nozzle off to sensitive plant. So volatility is an issue with these plant growth regulators. Some are at a much higher risk than others, but we just need to be aware of that and act accordingly. A few other considerations with using our plant growth regulators, that we make sure that we use calibrated equipment. We're applying at the right product, at the right rate, at the right gallonage, that we're spraying it with adequate droplet size, so we have large enough droplets that it's less likely to move off target, but enough to give us the coverage that we need. That we observe our grazing restrictions, and that these grazing restrictions pertain to the fence rows as well as to the interior of the field. We talked a little bit about glyphosate and trying to use it to control perennial plants as a spot treatment. And again, just be aware of the rotational restrictions or the grazing and the harvest restrictions with these products as well. For those that are growing straight legumes, there are a few products that are available. In Delaware, we don't have too many situations that are straight legumes, straight alfalfa. But we do have the option of a planting application of something like Eptam to help get it established. We've got the products just below Eptam on the left column that can all be applied to seedling alfalfa, AIM, Bucktrill, Buterac, Pursuit, Raptor, and then products that we can use later in the season once it's established. So there are a few options for legumes. The problem is that when which is most commonly used here, a mix between grasses and legumes, we are very limited on what we can use. For that at-seeding application of Eptam, not allowed, or we can't use it in these mixed stands because Eptam will kill our grasses. Once it's established, using Pursuit, Prowl H2O or Sharpen, labeled for use on some of these legumes and grass stands. Oops. So when we think about our herbicide programs and management of weeds within our forages, consider all of our options. Let's not think that, okay, I've got a weed problem, what's the herbicide I need to apply? Think of management to make sure that we're putting the weed maybe at a disadvantage and allowing as good of growth of a crop as we can. And then when we do get to narrowing it down and deciding which chemical we might need, think about timing and making sure that we're applying it at the right time. In many cases, I think our herbicide problems are not so much the wrong product, the wrong rate, but they're being applied at the wrong time, that we're applying while the weeds are small and susceptible to these options. So with that, if I have any time, Amanda, I'll take some questions, or if there's anything in the chat that I can address now. Oh, I heard early, someone asked about Buttercup and option for Buttercup. And 2,4-D is a fairly effective product on Buttercup in those situations where you can use it. A lot of times I think the treatments for Buttercup are going out after they see the flowers, and it really needs to go out as an early spring application. It is a perennial, so it's coming back from those perennial structures, and applying it in the early spring, and I guess I'd just venture to say probably within March or early April, before it really starts that rapid growth in the spring and starts to flower. Spraying it while it's small and most susceptible.
Great, thank you, Mark. We do have a few questions to go over for the answer on the Buttercup one. One of the other questions that we had earlier that you may have answered in your slides already, but was how to control broadleaf dock species in either an alfalfa orchard grass or a pure alfalfa stand that is not Roundup ready. If there is.
Yeah. That is a tough one. That's probably one of our bigger problems, and I'm not aware of a chemical option for that. We just don't have a good option. So spot treating it. If there's patches, proper mowing in the spring to eliminate seed set. So once that stalk starts to mowing it and preventing it from flowering so that infestation doesn't spread is another thing that could help long term. And the problem is that it starts to, it's perennial with that big taproot, but that it starts regrowing early in the spring, and get some growth on it before the alfalfa starts greening up as well. So it biologically it kind of fits in that niche where it competes well with alfalfa. So it's a challenge, but preventing seed production so that it doesn't spread and make that problem worse. Because again, it's got that taproot, so it's not a creeping perennial like horse nettle and some of the others. So that infestation is from seed, keeping it from going spreading.
Great, thank you. Another question that we had earlier, I think it was actually during one of our other talks, was, is there, oh, no, I just lost it. Sorry, hold on. Is there a recommended herbicide to totally eradicate established Bermuda grass without destroying other desirable grasses?
Short answer is no. Bermuda grass, we do not, there's a very limited list of products that are going to control grasses and grasses. Prowl will only control pre-emergent, so it won't touch it. Facet, while I've never sprayed Facet on Bermuda grass, I don't expect it to do much. And even like a single application of glyphosate often isn't enough to eradicate it. I mean, eradication is a tough thing to, when it comes to weed control, we don't talk eradication. We really don't have something that will outright eradicate a weed. So spot applications of glyphosate to control it, and repeated, sorry about that, repeating it from and setting it back. We just don't have a chemical option that's going to do it.
Okay, the next question was on hemp dogbane. What is the best way to get rid of it in hayfields?
As far as a product, Banville is probably the best product. Banville is a little bit better than 2,4-D on these perennials that have creeping rootstocks, like hemp dogbane or milkweed. A fall application, if possible, when the temperature starts to drop a little bit in the fall, or a spring application would be second. Again, we got to be careful about spraying it midsummer because of the temperature, but from a chemical point, the dicamba is the better of the two products. And being a perennial, and kind of like back to the Bermuda grass, it's going to take a couple of applications to bring these perennials under control. Sticking with it, and don't rely on just one application one time that it's going to take care of the problem. We've got to go back and keep an eye on those patches and hitting them pretty well. Another possibility, depending on your equipment, would be like a rope wick of glyphosate. If you have access to a rope wick where you could mix a strong solution of glyphosate and maintain the height of that rope wick so that it's I use rope wick, it'd be any type of bar application like that, but that you maintain the height above your grasses and wipe it on the hemp dogbane. would be another option that you wouldn't have to worry about environmental as much as you do with plant growth regulators.
Great, thank you. The next question is, can triclopyr be used on pasture areas? And if so, when can animals return to pasture?
You'll have to double check the label. So first of all, there are some versions of triclopyr that are out there that you can. For instance, crossbow is, but a lot of them are prepackaged mixes. You'll have to look at, if you're looking at specifically at only triclopyr, you'll have to check the label and the formulation that you're using to see if it's labeled here, as well as what is the rotational restriction. But triclopyr is available for use in pastures, I know, at least as a prepackaged mix, say like crossbow, and there was another one, was it forefront? I'll have to back. It was in one of my slides, and I don't know what the name of the commercial name of it is. But there are formulations available for pastures.
Okay. The next question is, what newer info can you share on the latest honeybee impact with herbicides? The local beekeepers in this person's area are removing hives in mass because of suspected colony collapses due to herbicide impacts, even when using the most bee-tolerant chemicals.
I'll be honest, I'm not aware of herbicides as a contributing factor to bee problems, bee colony collapse. We recently added that category, or that identified chemicals that have bee toxicity in our vegetable guide. And there were certainly plenty of insecticides, some fungicides that did that. But as far as herbicides, I recall, I don't remember seeing any of the herbicides that had those bee toxicity issues on their label. So I'm not aware of which product that might be referring to.
Okay. If the person knows more about any specific products, we can maybe kind of look further into that, but I'll move to the next question. As the volatility of those different formulations for the different compounds decreases, does the efficacy remain the same?
Yes. We particularly with the dicamba products, we've done a fair amount of testing of comparing them, the different low volatility formulations and so on, and have not seen efficacy problems or efficacy differences between those different formulations.
Great, thank you. The next question is, this person has heard of the new clover sparing herbicides that are apparently soon to be released. Do you know anything about those?
Clover sparing herbicide.
If you don't, I actually know the answer to this one.
I'll take it away, Amanda.
So actually, I was just in the American Forage and Grassland Council, the big national forage group, their national conference last week and the beginning of this week, and there was a presentation on this herbicide, which is going to be called Proclova, and it is an herbicide that will be able to be sprayed on mixed pastures containing white clover. So it will keep the white clover while getting rid of other broadleaf weeds. So it can be used on a white clover grass mix. It's not released yet. They're still going under approval with the EPA. Originally, they said that it was supposed to be approved and out later this year. Now, I guess the EPA is saying there are delays due to the coronavirus and the pandemic and all that stuff. So it might not be until 2022. So we have a little bit of a wait yet, but that is something that's coming down the pipeline as an option.
And by the time our next talk, Amanda, I'll have a lot more information. That's a new one. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. And I just heard that all a couple days ago, so it's hot off the press.
Yes.
So our next question is, can you talk about the timing of reseeding versus the reseeding restriction on the label? Is the reseeding restriction on the germination time of the grass or on the actual planting of the seed? So for instance, if you want to reseed, is it appropriate to seed first, then follow with an herbicide, such as, sorry, the wording is a little, is it appropriate to seed first, then follow with an herbicide in mid-February to spray for buttercup in March?
So a couple different things I think going on there. One is the reseeding interval is based on applying the herbicide to an existing crop and then planting so many months or so later. And that's calculated at planting. But in reality, we're only talking a matter of a week between planting and maybe emergence. So it's at planting. And so that's how those are defined, and that's how those are calculated. And then, the kind of the second part about the buttercup control of seeding it in the fall, and for most of our forages here, fall planting is the preferred planting compared to spring. But a lot of these herbicides can't be applied until the crop reaches an established stage. And with the grasses, it's really vague on a lot of labels as to when you can apply it. They said once it's established, and at what point is that? And so it's usually about 5 to 6 inches in height of the grasses, the forages. And even at those rates, the labeled is often at lower rates till the crop gets fully established. So planting in the fall and then trying to attack buttercup in that, you're going to be limited from a chemical standpoint, because that forage grass probably won't be established enough where you can use any rate of some of these plant growth regulators. That may be something you'd have to delay that application a little bit later, or live with it that spring and then go after it the following fall.
Okay, great, thank you. If that person has a further question based on that, feel free to let us know. But the next question is, what is the best way to control foxtail in established pastures and hayfields?
The best way, the best way is a good crop stand, clipping or mowing so that seed doesn't, you're not producing seed, and keeping a good solid stand of forage over the top of it so it's being shaded. That's really the best way. Our chemical options are very limited. The only thing that was going to have much effect on foxtail is going to be the Prowl H2O, which is going to have to go out as an early spring application, certainly by early May, because foxtails, it'll start to germinate by then, and it'll provide control for a period of time. But if we had some late emerging foxtail, it would not control it. So relying on a chemical strategy simply for foxtail is going to be tough to do. But I think being an annual species, I would also target stopping seed production.
Great, thank you. A similar question is, what is the best way to control wild onion or garlic in an established pasture?
Kind of a standard for a lot of our garlic has been 2,4-D. You know, we were talking a little bit earlier about the perennial hemp dogbane, and dicamba is a better product for that because it has creeping rootstock. For those species that have like bulbs and kind of a taproot, 2,4-D is the better of the options there. So 2,4-D for onion or garlic, and an application towards the end of March is generally going to be a better timing for those garlics. And again, being perennials, one application 1 year is not going to solve it, but being consistent and staying on top of it.
So the next question is, what will take out horse nettle in pastures?
A fall application of dicamba at the full rate, and with a lot of these perennials too, definitely talking about using the full labeled rate. But fall application of dicamba is probably our best treatment. It is definitely one where you're going to need a couple of seasons to control it. But I had a grad student a number of years ago that worked with horse nettle, and we did some side-by-side plots. And with a fall application, and dicamba was one of our treatments, we reduced the number of stems and the vigor of those stems back in the spring, but we still had them. And for a lot of folks that just looked at those plots said, you know, we really didn't do much. But if you compare what not spraying versus what spraying looked like, it was definitely beneficial. And a couple years of being consistent control to really set it back is what you need. Horse nettle doesn't really get much of a height differential between the crop, so like a wiper bar of glyphosate is not really practical there. More of a broadcast boom spray is going to be needed.
Great, thank you. The next question is, are there any organic options for herbicides?
Are there? So there are organic herbicides. The issue is we don't have any selective organic herbicides. So the things, most of the organic herbicides are going to be tissue that they come in contact with. So that's going to be the weeds as well as the crop. So you're going to injure the crop in the process. Most of these organic herbicides are also, you know, they're contact, they don't translocate, so they're not going to be very effective on perennials in terms of killing that rootstock. Some of the things like corn gluten meal and so on that are organic, I just don't see a good fit for them in pastures because they have a fairly limited residual control that they provide. They're pre-emergence herbicide, but relatively short, and you'd have to be making multiple applications. So not really viable options in the organic herbicide market for pastures.
All right, our next question is saying, this is not specific to any weed necessarily, but this person is wondering if you have a recommendation for a good company that makes sprayers. They're looking to buy one for use on their operation.
A good company, I mean, there's so much goes into that. Depends on their tractor. Are they going to be applying it with the tractor? I would say check with your local county agents, as they would know dealers and possibly used equipment that might be available in the area, and kind of be able to walk through exactly what their needs are for a sprayer and match up their needs with maybe sprayers that are out there. One of the things I will say about particularly with pastures and sprayers, one of the things you got to be careful about is how wide is your gate and how wide is your sprayer. So does your sprayer have access to the pastures? That's something that a lot of people don't think about until it's too late. I would suggest they talk with their local county agent and kind of walk through what their specific needs are and matching the sprayer accordingly.
Thank you. We had another question about foxtail, like timing of applications and how many. I think you answered that when you answered your first foxtail question. If that question wasn't answered, I suggest that person kind of re-comment that again, and we'll get back to it. But the next question is, are there any herbicides that are effective on sedges?
Yes, there is. There's a product I had in the list I didn't really talk about, but Yukon is a combination of halosulfuron and dicamba. And the halosulfuron product is very effective on sedges. Much better on yellow nut sedge than maybe some of the other sedges, but it's very effective on yellow nut sedge. So Yukon, I know it's labeled for the grasses. I'll have to look to see if it's labeled for mixed stands. I don't know. No, it wouldn't be because it's got dicamba in there. But it's the halosulfuron component of that that's very good on sedges.
Great, thank you. Our next question was, someone commented that for onion and garlic control, they found that if they use 2,4-D spraying after a cutting was most effective or was fairly effective. So just an observation there for everybody. The next question is, what about aminopyrrolid containing herbicides for horse nettle?
So the issue with aminopyrrolid, and it's the active ingredient, milestone, and a number of other herbicides that are registered in this region. When I talked about herbicides remaining active in the forage and passing through the manure of the animal and killing sensitive plants, aminopyrrolid is like the poster child for that. It is very sensitive. There's a lot of things that are highly sensitive to aminopyrrolid, and it is one of those that passes through the animal, or it remains active in the hay. You know, if you use the hay and spread the hay out on the field as kind of a or a sole amendment, that can often contain aminopyrrolid. Aminopyrrolid stays. It has a long life in the soil, a lot of long residual control, and so it remains active. We have rotational issues with it and so on, but it's the fact that it's very sensitive with the manure, and so if you're in a situation where it's solely your field, it's solely a grass pasture, and you're not moving the animals from field to field, you're not selling hay, those sort of things, it may be an option for you. But since so many fields are not in that situation, we don't recommend aminopyrrolid.
Great, thank you. Okay, the next question is, this person works on advising equine operations in Kentucky, and they have looked into recommending Prowl for pastures. However, they are concerned about a strong nimblewill / Bermuda grass surge by taking out the crabgrass or foxtail. Do you have any suggestions pertaining to that?
No. No, I don't. That's interesting though. I hadn't thought about that idea that the summer annuals are keeping the perennial weeds in check.
The solution is you really got to focus on those other components of the integrated weed management, where you really need that strong forage stand of your desirable species to help you outcompete some of these. And we have to remember that all of these herbicides are just tools, but really, our number one tool is to have that good, healthy, productive forage stand. That would be my best advice, I guess.
Yes, I would concur.
Okay. We do have one more question on foxtail. This person said foxtail is a big problem. Last year, basically all of the late season hay was lost because they had a big flush of foxtail. They did apply Prowl early, but they think its effectiveness was gone by summer. They have heard to apply it again after the first cutting, but he thinks that might not get him all the way to a fall cutting and is wondering if he should apply it a third time.
So I don't know about foxtail specifically. We were working with crabgrass and found that the two applications really helped provide our full season of control. We were still pretty clean with two applications. I think we went with the 2 quarts at both applications and did a very good job. And I would suspect it would be same type of results with foxtail, but you're right, it really needs that second application for full season control. And making sure that second application goes out before you get a big flush of giant foxtail midsummer.
Yeah, so I was wondering the same thing. Andy just commented he's not sure if the label on Prowl allows for 3 applications. I'm not sure either. I would have to check on that and see. Do you know off the top of your head if it does, or?
I would be surprised if it allowed 3.
Okay. Yeah, so we'd have to check. That might be one limitation of that. But we can look into that and get back to you. Okay, I think we have answered all of the questions. So thank you everyone for joining us.